because he's seen him ranked anywhere from 3rd to 11th, and thinks his sweet spot is 7th to San Jose or 8th to Los Angeles.
He's a tricky one because I could see him being drafted as high by third by Anaheim, and he's also someone that I could see falling into that San Jose, LA, like spot like you said, and he's someone that I rate towards the lower end of that top 10. I don't see as much play driving ability as some of the other guys around him, but if you're a team like say Anaheim who wants a higher end scorer to pair with a Trevor Zegras for the future, I think he would make sense in that slot for the Ducks. And he really is. He's one of the harder players for me to pin down where he's going to go. But from what I've heard, it sounds like there's a lot of interest in him towards, I would say, the top 5 of this draft class. But we've seen crazier things happen on draft day than a guy like Gunther falling out of the top 5. So
Yeah.
I'm always very wary to put down definitive statements on where a player might go on draft day. I could absolutely see him going in that top 5, but I would be relatively shocked to be fell below 8th.
I've seen a couple of big guys have him as high as 2, for sure. So I'm curious. Obviously, there's the Oil Kings connection there, and definitely an Edmonton connection. So that's pretty cool. I think he's actually born in Hamilton, but spent most of his life in the Alberta area, playing out at Sherwood Park, I think, if I'm not mistaken. So that would be where the question's coming from. Knowing though that he's not coming to the Oilers, I'm sure folks are probably a little disappointed. Although in oil country, we're more than happy to not have a first round pick or a first overall pick for a change. Which something about being a Devils fan as well, right?
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah. I got the Nico Hischier jersey on right here. So
right on, yeah, yeah, awesome. All right, okay. So we talked a little bit about kind of your, the people that you expected. We're going to talk a little bit about. We as we were talking about the leagues, that's when you started cutting out a bit, and I don't know if it was on my end or not. One of the things I'm kind of curious about is the USHL. Like, this league continues to have guys, drafted in the top round, high up. Like, is it getting better? I mean, it just seems to be pumping out. Like, we're watching Caulfield in the playoffs right now, right? Like, they've got some, really great players going through that system. Is that going to be, one of the standards going forward?
I think it absolutely is getting better. Throughout the years, the development program has always been fairly steady at pumping out top end talent. We look at Patrick Kane and Austin Matthews, Clayton Keller, Jack Hughes. Those guys have all been.
Don't mention Kessler, by the
way. They've all been standout players that have come through that NTDP program. But I think you're seeing a lot of growth in the USHL club teams and their ability to draw in high-end talent. You saw the Chicago Steel were able to draw in Adam Fantilli, who's a top-end player for 2023. And it sounds as though he's going to stay there next year rather than going to the OHL. So that's a really big get for the USHL as a whole. And they also got a commitment. I don't know if he decommitted at this point. I'll have to check in on it. But they were able to get Ivan Roshnachenko to commit to Muskegon at one point, who's a top-end Russian for next year's draft. So I think the USHL's ability to draw in that high-end talent is getting better compared to, say, these players opting to go to WHL, to OHL, or find somewhere over in Europe. So I think overall, the USHL is definitely becoming a much larger player in the overall prospect and draft landscape. So I think, especially given this year, they're able to pull in guys like Cole Sillinger away from his original league, I think the USHL is definitely a rising league to watch if you're looking to get into more prospect coverage.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, I've just been amazed at it. You're right? Like, it's not just the NTDP NTDP program, but it's all the other teams seem to be catching on board, and USHL has got wicked stats for drafted players that have gone on to do something. And I think as does the NCAA. Obviously, is continuing to grow, and it just keeps getting better and better. And obviously, guys like McCarr helped that out, and the development of players that might come into the league a little bit later. It's interesting. This part has really kind of been something that I've liked to follow. I was once having breakfast right beside Ken Holland, and he has no idea who I am, but he's sitting there, and I thought, well, I'll eavesdrop a little bit and hear what he has to say and see if I can get any tidbits. It was right before an Oilers game. Actually, it was Buffalo was in Edmonton, and so I was having breakfast behind him, and he was talking to a friend. He didn't talk anything that was noteworthy in terms of like what was going on with the Oilers at the time. But what he was talking about was the NCAA versus the CHL, and what where he would suggest kids go, and he was very high on the NCAA. Now, of course, I mean, when you think about Ken Holland, he's notorious for letting prospects develop and go that route. So it's not too big of a surprise that he'd suggest a league where you really want to see guys play 2-3 years in that league, and hone their skills and come out and be just top end players, right? And rather than the CHL route and then go into playing professional hockey right away, right? Which is very typical. I mean, players that go back for one more year, right, of WHL or CHL or wherever before they go play in the AHL. But I just thought that was kind of interesting, and so that's kind of neat from a prospecting perspective. Do you is there a league that you follow most, or do you kind of follow them all equally?
I've kind of jumped around a little bit. I think it depends on there's certain crops from different leagues that just kind of grab me a little bit depending on the year. A year ago, I was a big watcher of the MHL over in Russia. This year, I think just because of the strange circumstances of the year, wasn't really a certain league that really grabbed me as like my favorite of the bunch, I would say. But just going off of the NCAA discussion, I was actually, before you mentioned that story, I was thinking in my head, I think the NCAA of all of the North American leagues, I think it does the best job of preparing players for what the pro game is like. And I think you've seen that a lot, that the NCAA is becoming more of a development ground for coaches. And I think a lot of the coaching staffs in the NCAA, they instill a lot of systems and work ethic in these prospects where guys that spend 3 or 4 years marinating in college, they're very well equipped to jump right into pro hockey right away, rather than a kid that maybe he scores 120 points playing in the QMJHL a year, and I think the NCAA, out of all the North American leagues, I think I would agree. If I had a player that I drafted in the 3rd round, I'd probably prefer him go to the NCAA rather than say the OHL or the QMJHL.
Yeah, in those later rounds for sure, 100%. I mean that's a good way to look at it, right? If you're, drafting later on, looking at a guy that's going to go back and maybe play in NCAA. I mean, the challenge being, of course, is this, little back out rule, right? You could draft
Right,
them,
yeah.
and if they don't sign, which has burnt a couple of players, the Oilers, of course, signed. He was in Anaheim, didn't end up signing there, and then the Oilers signed him. Then he went to
Justin Schultz.
to
Yeah.
Schultz, right? Yeah, I mean that's the one that comes to mind when I'm thinking about the Oilers, right? And how he was booed every time he went into Anaheim, and of course there's been a couple other
Right.
names and guys that have gone around. So it's interesting. I mean maybe they'll fix that at some point, or maybe they won't. I mean it does force a player to make the decision to go pro maybe sooner than they should. I kind of love the idea of a guy going out and finishing their college career, right, and playing NCAA, and a team being all right. Like right now, I mean, it affects draft rankings for Russian players, right, that they might stay in the
Right.
KHL, right. I think it affects draft rankings for an NCAA player. Like I think Owen Power hasn't declared whether or not he'll go and play NHL, right? Like he's kind of suggested that he might go back and play NCAA, if I'm not mistaken. Isn't that right? Or have you heard that?
Yeah, he said as of now he's leaning towards coming back to Michigan for another year. But he said after the draft he'll have more discussions with the team that selects him. But so it sounds like he's open, but it sounds like his preference is to stay in the NCAA for at least another year.
Yeah, and to me, as a team, like if you're Buffalo and you need somebody or you want somebody that's going to make an immediate impact, then that might affect whether or not you say draft him or Hughes or right. Like you just don't know, right? Like what you're going to do. It I can't believe we're talking about we talk about the Oilers always getting number ones, but I can't believe we're talking about Buffalo still being up there.
Right.
Man, you know what? I actually know a lot of Sabres fans, and I feel my heart goes out to them. I mean, as Oilers fans and New Jersey fans, we all know about like, long streaks of rebuilds and while we're watching everybody else go wild. But man, I mean, this is an area. Buffalo gets a lot of talk for a team that's so low in the standings every year. I think I think there's a definite like feeling around the league, of the like a little brother feeling, like everybody wants them wants to see them do all right, and get out of this
Right.
funk because it's just beyond humor now. It's you got to feel bad for them, like it's yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, I live in like central like Western New York actually, so
yeah.
I have a lot of friends that are Sabres fans, and uh, I wish them well.
Yeah, it's,
Yeah.
it's a tough go. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Oilers. If we got a bit of time here, I mean, we talked about Sebastian Casa. You and Ash talked about in your mock draft about the Oilers taking him at number 19. Are there any other players in or around that spot that you think I mean you had who do you have in around, let's say, 17 through 23 right now? Is it still
Well,
the same?
we had them taking Sebastian Costa, but if they don't go with a goaltender, I think since the Oilers they spent some draft capital on the likes of Bouchard and Broberg, I think they'd be well suited to go with a forward and more specifically a winger, so they can have someone to complement, Connor, Leon, hopefully Dylan Holloway is able to come in and grab a center spot on that team. So I would love to see them go after a winger if they don't pick up a goaltender. And in that spot, I think there's a lot of really attractive options in the Oilers' range if you're looking at a winger. You could look at a guy who plays right in Western Canada in Logan Stankoven, who I think is he's a smaller 5'8" ish scorer, brings a lot of offense. I think he's likely going to be a little undervalued uh, in terms of where he goes in the drafts. And then someone I always think about when I think about who the Oilers could look at would be Nikita Chibrikov out of Russia. I'm not sure off the top of my head how much the Oilers have really favored towards Russians in recent years, but I think he's someone that would be a really good fit when you look at adding speed to your team to complement Connor McDavid. For my money, I'd say Chibrikov is probably the best skater in this draft in terms of just pure speed and agility. And I love the fit of being able to throw him in the Oilers' top six to just have another Lamborghini right next to Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl out there to just buzz around other teams' defenses. And another guy I don't quite have in that range, I have him more rated as a low first or early second, but I think would make sense in terms of just a fit with the Oilers would be Matthew Coronado from the Chicago Steel. And I don't, the reason why I'm a little lower on him than I'd say, consensus is I don't see a guy that can really drive his own line. But when you have guys like Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl on your team, that's not as much of a prerequisite, I would say. And what Coronado does so well is I think he's an excellent complementary scorer where you can go to dirty areas, he can bang in goals, and he banged in a lot this year in Chicago. I think he was nearly a goal per game this
Yeah.
year for the steal. Um, and he's someone that if he's there at 20, he might be gone by 20.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I've
think,
seen him ranked in the sort of top 15, 15 to 20 area.
yeah, and I don't quite rate him as high, but in terms of just a raw fit, I think he'd be a really good fit for the Oilers at 19th.
Yeah. What because I don't know if you know, I'm based in Halifax now, so there's a guy, and I don't think he's going to the Oilers. But what's your thoughts on Zachary Leroux? Because he, to me, he's an interesting guy. He's been up and down everyone's draft rankings for a year now. Even before pandemic, it seemed like he's ranked high first round to low first round to out of the first round. He have you had a chance to watch him play at all?
He's a really interesting case in that um, I would say a lot of North American prospects I don't think get labeled as super risky because they don't have that flight risk that say a Russian would have. But I think he's somewhat risky in just his discipline on the ice.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of like almost like a Brad Marchand or Matthew Tkachuk light, where he does have skill, he can bring a lot of offense, but he's just so undisciplined, and he loves playing a pest, but he can take bad penalties. I think in his QMJHL career, I think he's creeping up on, you might need more than one hand to count how many times he's been suspended. And I think that's somewhat of an issue with him. But if you're a team that you want to add some scoring punch, and you also want to add some sandpaper, I think he's a really interesting guy because he's not afraid to be a pest out there, and he can bring some skill and some offense to a lineup. I think he can play up and down a lineup, and I think a good landing spot for him would be a place where you take him into a very established core, and they were able to kind of rein in some of that discipline issues with him. But I think he's someone that is very interesting in, say, the final third of the first round, maybe early third of the second round. If you're looking for a gritty forward, I think he's as good as any in that range.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I think about him, and I think he's one of those players that if he can kind of get it together and really show that he's not going to fly off the off the handle.
Right.
Like he could be the steal of the round, right? Like he's creative, he's fun to watch, he's a good player. It's kind of like the difference between, say, well, maybe not even a good example. I'm trying to think of a good example. But like if you take like Kadri, who arguably cost the Colorado the series, right, against Vegas, right? Who is a hell of a player and just goes over the line like far too many times, right? But is incredibly useful, right? Versus a guy, I don't know. I mean, Marchand, since the licking incident, has been pretty good, right? If you can kind of change to what he is today, right? Like Marchand is absolutely 100% the one of the best players at it today, right? Like you hate the guy, but he's so damn good. And last week I think I suggested he was, in some ways underrated, right? Like I don't think people fully kind of realize just how good he is. Like he's always in the top 5 scoring, right? Year over year over year. And we are always talking about him, but nobody's ever mentioned him for a Hart Trophy or anything, right? Like it just doesn't happen. But he's so good, right? And I hate the guy. Like don't get me wrong, but if the Oilers found a way to trade for him tomorrow, you guarantee I'm not disappointed in that, right? So that's the kind of, like, I'm not suggesting Leroux could be a Brad Marchand, but that good. But he's certainly, in my mind, got the ability to be a high top 6 player. Am I maybe overvaluing him? You think?
I think you bring up Nazem Kadri is. I think that's just a very interesting case study in what you could be getting with Zachary Leroux, where he could be a really high-end impact player, could be a second-line forward. But part of what ended his stint in Toronto was the organization just felt that they couldn't trust him anymore. That when they need him the most, he'll see the red mist. He'll get suspended for a playoff series. Yeah, I think at this time that's some of the inherent risk that comes with Leroux, where on a night-to-night basis, you're not sure if you're going to be able to have him in your lineup. And if he's able to bring that
We're running with. We might have lost the stream again.
oh no.
Yeah. We caught most of what you had to say there. I'm just hoping that it. I think we're back on, which is good. All right, all good, all good. Yeah, this is the downside of going live now, right? Is
right.
and this is going to make it onto the podcast recording, but I'll say it anyway. I actually had the internet, which I've got a gig to the house, gig fiber. A moving truck drove by my house and snapped the line off.
Oh no.
And when they put the line back on, it's just never been the same. And I don't know if it's my side or your side, but it's always hard to tell. All I know is that ever since that happened, it seems to happen more often. And,
right.
I'm going to have to check that out. All right. So we'll move on from Leroux. Because I do think, I think that, some of it is obviously being here in Halifax. You watch the kid play and you notice how talented he is. And I'm just kind of curious. I like, love watching. I love watching that and seeing guys that I get a chance to see live, right? Like see how well they do and where they could go. I'd love to see him do well, but I'm think about like Tony DeAngelo, for instance, right? Like, there's a good chance he'll be bought out, right? Like after the Stanley Cup's awarded here. And, is there a team that's even willing or going to take a shot at him, at a low rate? I mean, like you're going to get roasted no matter who you are.
Right. Yeah.
And does he have enough upside? Like to me, that's the kind of guy Leroux is, right? Like maybe not on the social media side, but on in the game side, right? Like he spit on somebody. That's what got him suspended for one of his suspensions, right? Like
it kind of brings you back a little bit to maybe not quite as high end of a talent, but just the similar situation that dropped him down, to where he and ultimately got drafted, where Ryan Merkley went to San Jose years ago, where probably talent alone, he was probably a top 10 talent, but there was concerns with attitude issues and some discipline that really ultimately ended up him dropping down to, I believe, 20th to San Jose, I would say.
Yeah, I don't remember, but it was low, right? Versus where, because I think he was always in the top 10 all year, right? And then,
Yeah, and it was the same thing where, there were concerns with his attitude, and it took a team like San Jose where they felt that, their locker room and their group was strong enough to, reel the kid in and kind of iron out those issues. And I think, I don't know if there's attitude issues with Leroux. I haven't heard any of that, but I think it's going to take a similar kind of thing with Leroux, where the organization that takes him has to be confident that they can iron out some of that discipline and be able to rein him in a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't fly at the NHL level. It barely flies at the, the junior level. So, it'll be interesting. I'm just, I'm really curious. And then obviously it'll be a couple of years before you ever find out if the, player makes any dent in the NHL. But I'll definitely be a guy I'll be following. All right, let's finish off tonight. We'll chat a little bit about what's upcoming. I mean, there's a couple of. I'm starting to hate the term generational talents that are coming out. We're not going. Let's not use that term. Let's just say really top end prospects, Canadian kids, which I know doesn't matter to you, matters to us here in Canada. But Shane Wright obviously is one guy that's outstanding, and I'm sure you got a chance to watch him lots. And then the guy you probably would have saw, of course, at the U18s, Connor Bedard. I mean, what are your thoughts on these guys? Like right now, they look to be locks for Well, I mean, there's I shouldn't say that. Michkov looks pretty damn good too, right?
Right.
But Bedard just seems to be running away with that. I know Michkov looks good, but this is kind of like it's becoming to me like a Connor versus Eichel sort of Connor versus Jack sort of thing, right? Where Bedard just seems to be that just a little bit better, right? I don't know
Right.
your thoughts on that anyway, and on both those players. Let's start with Shane Wright.
So Shane, I mean, okay, you mentioned that you don't like the term generational, and I agree. It's been thrown around a little bit too often in recent years. Um, but like I think for the likes of Shane Wright, Matvey Michkov, Connor Bedard, I think it's almost fitting. These kids are just remarkable. Um, I believe today I think the Vegas odds came out for like the Stanley Cup,
Yep.
and my Devils were tied for last in the odds, and I was like, Shane Wright's available next year. I think I'm okay with that.
Yeah, yeah,
But he's such a gifted goal scorer. The player that I think about right now when I think of Shane Wright is someone like Steven Stamkos, where he came in and he was 23 years old. He's potting 60 goals, 2 out of 3, 3 out of 4 years, whatever it was at the NHL level.
yeah,
And I think Shane Wright has that in his goal scoring toolkit. He's such a weapon on the power play. He's got such a great release, heavy shot, and that shot's only going to get better as he gets older and as he gets stronger. And he's so intelligent. Is able to manipulate the puck and defenses, get to high interest scoring areas. And he's remarkable. I don't imagine he'll fall from that number one spot. He has a pretty good horse in the race behind him, and Brad Lambert out of Finland,
hmm
who's also fantastic. But I don't see any way Lambert's able to catch him for that number one spot.
yeah,
And then when it comes to Connor Bedard and Matvey Michkov, um, my two brothers, they don't follow prospects at all, and those are two kids I can't help but just rave to them. Feel like you don't know how good these 15-year-olds are. Like these kids are incredible. Um, these two kids, when you look at draft history, they have almost no comparables when it comes to Bedard and Michkov. Bedard's the first ever exceptional player out of the WHL in history.
yeah,
So what he did this year in the WHL at his age has literally no comparable, which is kind of insane. And then when it comes to that Matvey Michkov, the only player that you can really compare to what he did at this age when it comes to the Russian juniors is Nikita Kucherov, who's
he's
one of
all right.
the yeah he's
Yeah,
decent.
he's decent. Yeah,
So like that's the comparables you're talking about with these kids, and I think generational is actually fairly worthy for those kids. When it talks to me, these kids, there's almost no players like them throughout junior hockey history, which I think is really interesting.
yeah,
And they're going to be in the same draft class, which is just insane.
yeah.
Um, and uh, gun to my head, I have no idea who I would prefer in terms of just talent. I would be surprised if Bedard falls from that number one spot in 2023, just on the basis alone that Matvey Michkov signed an extension with SKA over in Russia. So I believe the earliest to be able to get Michkov over to North America will be 2026.
Oh yeah.
So you'll get Mishkov at second overall, and you'll thank yourself in 4 years when you finally get him, because he's going to be fantastic, but he's not going to come in and be an impact player right away like Connor Bedard will.
Yeah. It's interesting. Actually, I didn't know about the extension, so that's good. One of the great things about doing these prospect things week over week is you guys are helping me get a education here. so, so by the time it's all done, if I sound a little bit like Brandon Holmes when I'm talking about a player, you'll know why, because I had a chance to chat with you. No, it's all good. Hey, we're closing into the bottom of the hour. I mean, you said you got Owen Power at one. Maybe just finish it off. You think Buffalo takes Owen Power?
I think they do. I think the more and more we've gone through this year, I think he's really separated himself as the top prospect. I wasn't completely sold on him until I saw him play this year at Michigan, and I really saw just how capable he was as a 200-foot contributor. I think his absolute floor, I think, could be someone like a Seth Jones. He's a big offensive
He's
minded blue liner.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's like the lower end of what he could be. I think there's some debate right now how good Seth Jones really is, but you see a similar toolkit in Owen Power when you compare him to Seth Jones, and um, Buffalo, they're probably they're probably closing on a Jack Eichel trade soon, and I think maybe the future of the Sabres for the next 5-10 years is maybe they look to, instead of building around a franchise center, maybe they look to build around that blue line with Owen Power and Rasmus Dahlin, Henry Jokiharju, and maybe that's their identity moving forward. And I'd be surprised if he's not the number one pick for the Sabres.
Yeah. I had a chance to. I don't know why, but for some reason the Sabres are just one of those teams I've had a chance to watch live, kind of everywhere, and I've had a chance to watch Darlene live, and I don't think the world fully understands just how good this player is.
It's
Like,
fantastic.
yeah, like he does things that you got to watch live, right? Like you just don't get to see them on video, right? Like you don't get to see him on TV, and you watch him just in the back end. And I'm a big Darlene fan. Just after watching him, live a couple of games and getting down near ice level and seeing how he plays and how he looks at you talk about hockey sense. I mean, he's brilliant, and I suspect, if Buffalo should ever turn this franchise around, which I hope they do, because that's hard for one team to, as I know as an Oilers fan, it's hard to kind of endure that level of. And they've had moments of brilliance, right? Like,
Right. Yeah.
they've had some amazing winning streaks, and then they get this. It's just weird. Anything you want to finish with? Anything that you kind of think this draft, big surprise? Anything that comes to mind, or maybe last words for you?
Uh, I don't know about a big prediction because I think anything goes for this draft class. I think it's going to be a really fun day for the first round of the draft, and it's always such an exciting time. And I think this year, just because of how unpredictable it is, I think it's just going to be a fun day. I think you know there's so much that can happen, and uh, I think for my like big prediction, I think we might see 3 goaltenders go in the first round this year. I think that's the big one I'm gonna throw out there. But in terms of exact slots, I have no idea because the draft is already so unpredictable this year. Not a whole lot would surprise me, I guess.
Yeah, and once dominoes start to fall, right? Like GMs have their eyes on a couple of people, and they start going down that list, and based on interviews and who they know, and yeah, there's lots into it, right? Like that, we
Right.
don't get a chance to see, and you were lucky. You said you sat in with Pert on that interview, and like some of those, like to be able to talk to these players can give you a whole different perspective on who they're going to be and what kind of player they are, what their ethic is like, and all of those little things. So, hey, I appreciate you coming on, Brandon. Hopefully, I get you back on. Maybe we'll get you middle of the season or something. We can kind of talk about what's happened and maybe where some of the prospects are playing and that. Where do people find you? And tell us a little bit about that before you go.
So you can find most of my work over at Future Considerations right now. We just put out our draft guide, but I usually have a monthly column over there you can check out. Um, and then some more like personal stuff that I put out from time to time. You can find that over at Riding Pine, which I think we might have a bigger announcement at Riding Pine pretty soon. So just a little teaser for that. Keep an eye out for that. And that's about it. Yeah.
All right. Well, congrats again on the nuptials, and
Thank you.
well done, and thanks again for joining me. I'll get you back. Maybe just stay on for a minute, and we'll say goodnight to everybody.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.